Happy New Year, everyone. The first show of 2024 starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. It's so good to see them, among them our guests. I'm looking forward to getting their questions for our guests in a short while. Tonight, we also have our producer, Make Ketlamotlabe, who's standing by with some residents in Southdale. There you see his handsome face. We're going to get their views, diverse perspectives on tonight's topic. Listen, aren't you tired about whataboutism in politics? It's a practice used by some politicians or leaders of responding to a difficult question or accusation by making a counter-accusation or raising a different issue. And this tactic is used the world over. How about just being straight with us as a voter? You messed up, acknowledge it, and let's move forward. Don't double down on nonsense and assume we have a memory of a goldfish. But these are some of the sentiments I've often heard over the 2 decades that I've been doing this job. People around the world are asking similar questions that you will be asking yourselves this year. How do we get credible, honest people to represent us? And what difference can they make in our lives? Look, millions of people around the world, they're heading to the polls this year. Elections, it's an anchor of democracy. And it answers the question, how can we use government as an instrument for good? Which leads us to the question of the week. And we ask you, with over 50 countries heading to the polls in 2024, including South Africa, what makes these elections significant for you as the voter? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Let's walk and talk. As always, head to the magic ball, get you some context. Big questions, right? What's South Africa's political state of play? Is there appetite to vote in these elections? Remember, 30 years of democracy. Do you see value in voting? Service delivery issues, bread and butter issues, important material. How does it stack up in terms of your lives? Let us know. Share your thoughts at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, let's get you context. And as always, we turn to the Magic Mall, what we know and why it matters. My guest tonight is SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokwena. She comes on set. Sophie, thank you very much indeed for your time. We need your better mind to break this down for us. Now, as we said, over 50 countries going to the polls this year. These are some of the key elections people will be watching out for. Why?
Well, quite important. You know that as we speak now, there's a shift in terms of balance of forces around the globe. You know that we have been led by the West for quite a long time, and it looks like now the South is cementing its authority based on the challenges that the world did experience. Let's start with COVID-19, where there was no solidarity and support from the North. Then the war in Ukraine also, where the West and America in particular leading the charge in terms of support to Ukraine. And you had the BRICS nations also looking at this matter, Russia being a member of BRICS, and also now the South-South cementing its authority. Right. And therefore these elections are quite important because this shift, for us to see this shift really happening, it will depend on who is in charge in different countries that are playing a significant role in terms of ensuring that there's that shift.
And this is one of the countries that people will be watching. The way it's shaping up now, it's reminiscent of 2020, right? You have Biden on one side, you have Trump on the other side. Obviously, Trump has to go against Ron DeSantis as well as Nikki Haley, but it's so far the pundits are saying he has an upper hand. How do you see that playing out?
Well, you are correct. And I think the Democrats with Joe Biden, the incumbent, are working very hard to ensure that he is coming back. But on the other hand, you have the Republicans who want to unseat Joe Biden. But the problem with the Republicans, as you pointed out, the person who's quite popular currently within their support base is Donald Trump, with all the challenges that he has. But also, as I pointed out, in terms of shifting balance of forces globally, you have the United States of America at the center, the war in Ukraine, now the war in the Middle East, and these two issues will have a factor in terms of what's going to happen in the United States of America. And by extension, whoever becomes the president of the United States of America, also, again, the issue of that shift will be affected, particularly in terms of decisions in relation to the war in Ukraine, the current challenge in the Middle East. And therefore, Biden is facing a huge challenge internally, particularly on the war in Ukraine. The Americans are saying that a lot of money has been sent to Ukraine while they have their own challenges post-COVID-19. Now with the Middle East, a huge voter group or constituency that is supporting Palestine is not happy about the decisions taken by the United States of America in relation to the Middle East question. And I think at this moment, what Biden wants is to see the war ending so that he can focus on internal issues.
I want to just talk a bit about the Middle East and the geopolitics. As we know, big story of the week at the ICJ, hearing the genocide case put forward by South Africa. I wonder, what sort of impact or consequences would this have in terms of relations between South Africa and the United States?
One thing that the U.S. has accepted is that South Africa has demonstrated last year that it was not going to be bullied in terms of its foreign policy. For me, when I look at how America has responded in relation to South Africa's position in the Middle East, it is much better than when they were aggrieved in relation to South Africa's position on the war in Ukraine. And therefore, I think America has come to terms that Africa has got its own voice. And therefore, for me, the big issue with this matter is how will this impact the elections in South Africa? It will. You have a huge number of people, a voting bloc, people who are sympathetic to Middle East question in relation to Palestine. Those provinces where you have huge numbers in terms of people who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, be careful.
And that works both ways, isn't it? It works a similar dynamic in the United States as well, so it's important. You were speaking about Africa. These are the major elections that's happening this year. Anything that stands out for you?
Yeah, what stands out for me, it's the West Africa, where we saw a number of change of governments by military. When you look at Mali going to the elections, what's going to happen there? And also countries such as Algeria in the north, currently being a non-permanent member of the Security Council, and we expect Algeria or Morocco to take over as the chair of the African Union. You have countries such as Ethiopia, South Africa. That's the main one. And then, of course, I don't want to talk about South Sudan. They were supposed to go to elections last year. They didn't. But when you go to the south, the SADC region, Namibia, clearly Hage Geingob, his term is coming to an end. The candidate for SWAPO is going to be a woman. Are we likely going to have a woman president in Namibia? You go to Botswana, the current problem is the current president and the former president, Masisi and Khama, who are at each other's throat. Will Khama's party make inroads? You go to South Africa, this is a big one. You know what's happening. I mean, the governing party right now dealing with their former president who has decided to throw his weight behind the Umkhonto we Sizwe party. We heard earlier on what the Secretary General of the ANC said. The reality is whether President Zuma, former President Zuma, can try and deny it. The fact is, I mean, you can't belong to a particular party and campaign.
Right.
Voting is something, I mean, your vote is secret. You can still do it quietly. Nobody will see that. But campaigning and leading the charge, I think the ANC will have to deal with that matter.
Yeah.
And I think, but in South Africa, my observation is that we are going, there's a possibility of two coalitions. The coalitions, these coalitions, the coalition led by DA with other parties, that
Right.
Monsoon Pact,
Yes.
and then we'll have the coalition of the so-called left, talking about MK party, your PAC, your particularly the strong party there being the EFF, and the ANC being in the center.
Yeah.
If the elections, ANC doesn't get 50+1, which I think they can still pull it,
Yeah.
they will have to decide whether they are going with the coalition led by the DA or the coalition led
Right.
by EFF. So I think the ANC, when they are discussing coalition, they are looking at these ones, the similarities and the differences, are they surmountable? These ones, the differences, the similarities, are they surmountable? And I think the ANC, being the broad church and being the middle, it is really in the center.
Right. Interesting dynamics. I'm going to touch on some of those issues that you put it with my guests a little later on. But maybe does this talk to the wider issue of democracy? This, you're looking at the Open Society Barometer, right? Asking the question, can democracy deliver? And as you can expect, a lot, 86% saying, yeah, they prefer democracy. But look at this, and especially this segment of society, leaning and appealing to the authoritarianism. How does that play out in terms of Africa as a whole when the youth are, frustrated with the governments?
The leaders have failed the young people of the continent. They are restless. And that is why when you look at what's happening in West Africa, the coups, it started with young people taking to the streets, including Sudan. And therefore, later you had a situation where the military used that opportunity to cement its authority and its power, protecting its own interest, and therefore doing away with the democracy that we are used to. But the democracy has failed the youth of the continent. And it is not democracy as a principle, but the leaders on the continent have failed young people. Look at the population in Africa. You know, the majority of the population is young people, and therefore they are not working. And they are now restless, and therefore you see that movement where people then tend to believe in this approach because they think these leaders will do something better. And therefore, in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, it will depend on how they behave, perhaps because these are young generals, young people. Maybe they will take their countries to elections and therefore bring that change, that much needed change.
And I've got a quote here from, and it was a forward written about the barometer, Open Society Barometer. It's written by Mark Malloch-Brown, president of Open Society Foundation. And he says, in part, the reports of democracy's demise are greatly exaggerated. In fact, it has a strong pulse. And the gravest threat it faces is not the revival appeal of authoritarianism, but rather the question of whether democratic leaders can deliver for their population. It boils down to delivery, and this talks to the ideals and the National Development Plan that people are aiming. We don't have enough time to go through this, but this is basically a plan that is out there. Whether this is achievable, people think that's the whole thing, right?
Nothing else, but the plans are there, the ideas are there, implementation.
Good on paper. What's it like on the ground? Sophie Mokoena, thank you very much indeed for your time. That is SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. They're giving us her take on global issues, geopolitics, and the elections, upcoming elections. All right. The regular word on the street feature. We took to various streets of Johannesburg to get your views, seeking diverse insights in terms of the topic for today. This is what you had to say. Watch.
I would hope that as a country we can avoid a lot of those divisive election messages and stick to what's really important. So inclusive economic growth that builds off the sort of competitive advantages that we have as a country. So I hope to see that as a primary message, and I hope people can respond to that, because that's how we get out of the trouble that we're in.
I'm hoping with the elections that we have, that the voters, the ones who will be voting, will vote for people who reflect their thoughts and ideas.
I think the focus should be, just to continue service delivery and improving service delivery to people who are in dire straits.
We expect an election which would always make sure we maintain our dignity as Africans.
What I want to see it's basically change. So number one, what I can say is that we have noticed the effect of load shedding, more especially in 2023. It has affected us big time. It has affected businesses. A lot of jobs were lost. So I'm just hoping for change in general. Yeah, I'm voting for the party in order to see change.
If the government they can create opportunities for the youth of South Africa, I think I'll be happy to vote, and that's what I want to see after I've handed my vote.
Basically, a new year for repairing old things and then better change.
All right, thank you very much indeed for airing your views. I want to continue this conversation. That's the whole point of today's topic, right? The discussions is to get a sense of what issues are close to your heart. Let's do that right now. Let me bring in our producer, Make Ketlimoklabe. He's standing by with Southdale residents out of Johannesburg. Make, very good evening to you. What's the sentiment on the ground, sir?
Well, evening to you, Blaine, and the viewers. Well, I can tell you, Blaine, we arrived in this area just about an hour ago, but you walk around the streets here, you get a sense that, yes, many of these residents here, they want to see themselves visiting those polling stations, voting stations, and casting their votes. And you then ask a question, why? Why do you want to vote? They just want to see changes in their community. They want to see these politicians, according to them, coming to the ground to see what they see, to feel what they feel, and to experience what they are experiencing. But let's talk to them because they are here. And let's start with first-time voter first. My sister, thanks so much for your time. Talk to me. What are you looking forward in this year's elections?
First things first, we'd like to hope that once everything is over, there's going to be change, because once you vote, you know that's your voice, and your vote contributes to whatever party that you believe in. And one thing that I would really love to change is like everything that's happening with the youth. You name them, your job opportunities, bursaries, and everything like that. We really hope that there's going to be a change, because our youth is drowning and we need the youth to bring change.
Yeah, absolutely. My brother, you have been there before many times, I'm sure. Talk to me. Are you hoping for perhaps coalition government this time around? What are you hoping for?
No, thank you for the opportunity. Coalition government, I've never seen it working. I think we have witnessed it in, for an example, here in Johannesburg, it never worked. We are still struggling with the same coalition government that we are having. In Tshwane, it never worked. You go to Johannesburg, the city is a trash. The service delivery, then because the other will be pointing another one will be pointing another because of the power. So I think coalition government, to me, it doesn't work. And if it would then go up to the presidency, that will be the worst scenario, which I don't think we will, as South Africans, enjoy the freedom of this country or of our freedom.
Is that the sentiment that you share? my sister?
Yes, I do share that. I don't think collusion will work for this country. We saw it in Tshwane, it didn't work. We're experiencing it right now in Johannesburg. It delaying service delivery. Like collusion won't work. I don't think it will work in this country, especially having a president through collusion. Like, that will be a nightmare for us South Africans.
Indeed. My brother, what sort of changes do you want to see in your community after these elections?
Yeah, I want our people to grow, and our kids to go to school, will safely walk in the streets, and our service deliveries. I mean, sometimes our streets are dirty and nothing gets done about it, and things like that. I want change like that. I want jobs for us people, man. A lot of people don't work, so most of the time they go to criminal, So, yeah, that's a basic thing. Yeah.
Pagania, talk to me. You voted for players recently to represent you. Yes. This time around is different.
Yes.
This is politics. Talk to us. What are your expectations this time around?
My expectations into ezinkulu Mtimka. Yabona la eSouth Africa sihluphekile. Akunamsebenzi. Gcwele abonyawupe. Gcwele abantu abalala emabridgini, asinazindlu, asinani Mtimka yabo. Sesincengele ukuthi masivota, sivotele le party ezosiphatha ngendlela eright. Singabuyeli la sibuya khona Mtimka. Ngoba kumanje mangaphuma la kule ndawo esihlala kuyo. Kuhijack izindlu eziningi. Sihlala nabantu abanye angeke kubazi, you understand Mtimka. Labantu abahlala nabo abanye babo bafike nje ngeke kwazi umangala nje sokunabantu abasha la uhlala khona awubazi nokuthi labantu bafike isikhathi sini kanjani. Uyabona ukuthi labantu laba bangene kanjani la eGoli nje la eGoli la. Yabo ukuthi bangena kanjani bayazi bona labantu abasibavotelayo. So manje labantu besibavotela kudala asiyekeleni ukubavotela bafethu asizameni sitholeni ini ukuvotela iparty ezosiphatha kahle. Buka ingane kumanje ingane iziningi siyalamba. Asinayo impuphu asinane ezindlini mawungavula amakhabethe kujayiva amaphela. Soyenza kanjani? IJanuary manje labantwana baye esikoleni. Soyenza kanjani kodwa Mtimka? Asitholeni umsebenzi. uRamaphosa akayenza implana asukumisa amasokisi silambile. Uyabo singaze sihambe siyotshontsha sogqekeza siboshwe siyoboshwa kusasa abantwana bazosupporta ubani ngcono sitathe abantwana sibanikeza uRamaphosa abasupport. Uyayibona. Thank you, Mtimka.
Interesting sentiments there, Blade. Obviously, what he's saying is that, I mean, they live in this area. They don't even know some of the people that they live with. I'm sure he's referring to illegal immigrants in this area. He's also saying that, I mean, there's a lot of responsibilities that they actually have to carry, but government needs to play its role. I mean, there's a lot of children here that they need to take to look after, and but they're unable to do so because they are unemployed. Criminals as well, they are actually playing around. They've turned some of these communities into their playground playing. And obviously, the sentiment again that's coming from this area is that they want government to put a stop to crime, to put a stop to unemployment.
Yeah, and the business is called Writing to Pictures, right? Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get straight to the discussions. Don't want to waste any time. A number of issues that are being raised. The issues of crime, service delivery issues, but also the issue of coalition. Let me welcome my guest, Vusi Gumbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Happy New Year. Researcher at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at UJ. Other guest is Dr. Ongama Mtimka. He's a political analyst. Good to have you on the program, Doc. Also, we have our digital audience. They will be throwing questions at our guests. Thank you very much indeed. Happy New Year to all of you. It's still okay to say Happy New Year, right?
Yeah. We are still within 7 days.
Now, what gets us to that happy place? Elections, voting. That's a must, right? But you've heard some of the issues there. As I said, service delivery issues, those are given, right? The issues of water, electricity, sanitation falls under that umbrella. But coalitions, very interesting. Possibilities of opposition coming to the fore. The multi-charter bloc emerging. The aim, I guess, would be to try and force the ANC under 50%. But the appetite on the ground from that sample group is not favorable. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's not surprising considering what has happened, city of Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, to some extent the city of Ekurhuleni. But we must also ask whether or not research shows that prior to coalitions, prior to 2016, were services better, right? Because we cannot say that service delivery has been poor simply because there are coalitions. Yes, the instability of government does impede on service delivery, but the things that we say must be informed by scientific research. Because for example, for the ANC to lose these metros, it means that voters were not happy with how municipalities were run. So that might say even before coalitions, services were not that good, right? So we must make that distinction between saying we do not want municipalities that are unstable, and by extension, we do not want a national or provincial governments that are unstable. However, whether or not coalitions or unstable coalitions have a direct impact on service delivery, it's a give and take situation, because we'll have to look at prior and what the research says.
Right. Dr. Mtimka, coalitions by its very nature is not necessarily a bad thing. Just working together and delivering, that's the aim, isn't it? How do we get to a place where it works not only for the various parties, but also the people on the ground?
Thank you. Good evening to you and your viewers. Yes, indeed. Voters, when they stand in the ballot box, are not doing an exercise that seeks to deliver a coalition government. They may be voting to change, they may be voting to punish the governing party of the time. And coalitions become an outcome of both the aggregated preference of voters, but also of a system of proportional representation. Because remember, without this system, we could be using first past the post, which would make people, even if they're winning by very small margins, to become leaders. And South Africans would complain about that system too. I think that what we must accept is that what we are seeing is a transformation process that has to go via coalitions, and probably later in the 2020s, I actually think in the early 2030s, it might crystallize into a two-party system or whatever the case may be. Yes, there is a need, I think you're quite right, Blaine, for maturity in how we conduct coalitions. And I think that both political maturity and leadership character, but also making and remaking the arrangements that bind parties together so that they can, one, remain committed to the coalitions, and two, committed to ensuring that they deliver to the people of the country. What has caused a lot of problems at a local government level is that because of the economic situation we find ourselves in, where there are no alternatives, people take from political office as they take political office as an opportunity for self-aggrandizement rather than serving the people. And as a result of that, they are keen to shift coalitions at the click of a button or at the slightest impression that they may have a better deal elsewhere. And thinking about a better deal is not from the perspective of what's best for people, but what's best for the self. So these mechanisms that are done, such as the multi-party charter and other things that seeks to bind politicians better, are part of the necessary process to try and help us to do coalitions better.
Right. Having said that, and you mentioned the multi-charter block, with the introduction of new players in the political field, such as the MK party, is the degree of uncertainty in terms of the outcome of this next elections still relatively high?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, that's when we judge the maturity of a democracy. When you get to a stage where election outcomes are uncertain, because what that does is that theoretically it should give rise to what we call regime performance, where the incumbent government, whether it's a coalition or a dominant party, tries to perform as best as they can when they secure power, so that come the next election, they stand a better chance of being elected. So it's a good sign that we've gotten to a stage now where electoral outcomes cannot be predicted with absolute certainty.
Right. Vusi, if that is the case and there's a degree of uncertainty, what does that say about historical identity loyalties in South Africa?
Yeah. I think these elections are when South Africans in particular reach an epiphany where they say that being subjected to welfare crumbs does not cut it anymore, right? Giving the bare minimum does not cut it anymore. I think South Africans are using or will use these elections as a way of saying we are grateful for what has happened. There are so many things going on in South Africa, but the bad outweighs the good, right? So South Africans are going to use these elections either to affirm how far the country has gone in the last 30 years or say we want a different direction, right? And the different direction does not necessarily mean that we want this party over another party. A different direction is, and based on the sentiments of those people in Southdale, that we want service delivery, okay? People do not necessarily want to involve themselves in party politics and all of that. What the sentiments on the ground is that people want to see change. And I think that's what they will use these elections for, and saying that they're no longer going to be sentimental. Right. Yes, they are grateful, but sentiments does not put bread on the table. Sentiments is not going to make sure that NSFAS is able, to deliver funds in time ahead of universities opening. Sentiments are not going to help alleviate poverty that has a black face, unemployment that has a black face, and the fact that we're the most unequal society in the world. So what you're going to see in these elections are going to be, one, the fact that South Africa has pretty much a stable democracy, strong democratic institution, and as Dr. Mtimka says, the notion that going into these elections, unpredictable outcomes means that our democracy is now maturing. But on the other hand, this is now a fertile ground for saying when more than one party, should it happen, come into power, we're going to see the rise, hopefully, in political administration, service delivery, and maturity.
Right. And just before I go to the digital audience, you're mentioning something in terms of sentiment, not putting bread on the table. Also, social media activism might not necessarily get you the results that you want, right? You wrote an interesting piece on SABC News.com saying that South Africa can learn a lot from Ukhozi FM's
Certainly.
Song of the Year ahead of the elections. Also.
I was quite intrigued on the first when people were complaining that, Iplan by Dlala Thukzin didn't win Song of the Year, Mnike didn't win Song of the Year. And when I looked at the votes, Khuzeni, amassed almost 1 million votes. So what then prompted, for me to write that piece was that what we can learn from there is that social media activism doesn't work. You can tweet however way you like, you can post however way you like. If you do not go out and register on the 3rd and 4th of February, if you don't go out and vote later this year, you'll have to accept that others will make that choice on your behalf. And I think that's what that opinion piece was about. The fact that what we must learn from Ukhozi FM is that, in fact, their listeners in particular, is that if you like something, you go out and vote. You don't become complacent and believe that simply because something is popular is going to win. Because I think simply because these two other songs were very much popular, there was that complacency to say maybe they will win Song of the Year, right? So that is an example of that social media activism is not a reflection of life on the ground.
Luhaba Pambili, Minentle, let's hear your thoughts.
Good evening, everybody. I think as a first-time voter, there's definitely a lot of excitement because this year will be my first year voting. So there's a lot of excitement definitely to see whether we can actually put our mouths where the money is, put your money where your mouth is. Because like we said, there's been a lot of social media activism. You'll see people on TikTok talking about their dissatisfaction. The youth has been commenting on the Russia-Ukraine war. They've been commenting on the Israel-Palestine genocide, just like the issues on NSFAS. Basically, clearly there've been a lot of dissatisfaction by the youth, and this 2024 election is basically a chance for the youth to actually choose the parties that they think speak for them, and to basically choose parties that they think will represent the issues that they have been sort of, having problems with.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Mtimka, Minenhle mentioned the issue of what's happening in the Middle East, and I wonder what sort of factor will that play in terms of the Israel-Gaza war play in our local elections?
Wow, this is quite interesting. I'm thinking foreign affairs is going to play a role in the South African elections that it hasn't played before. Interestingly, the parties to watch here are mainly the big parties, the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. I doubt that it's going to have a huge effect per se, but I think that it will have some role. So, for example, on the Palestine-Israel issue, a lot of social media commentators are saying, look, the DA is being exposed for not taking a stance, and while at the same time it has pursued voting constituencies that may actually want it to express an opinion on that matter and in fact be pro-Palestine. And then the ANC is winning a lot of brownie points in the international stage, which will have some influence. I don't think it's going to decide. I think South Africans are going to be going to that election based on their lived experiences with service delivery more than anything. But I think, interestingly, we'll have to, after this election, rethink how we factor the role of foreign affairs in our elections. It's not going to be anything close to what it is in the US, where it's a big issue. But I think it's going to be significant this time.
All right, Doc, thank you very much indeed. I need to take a quick break. What about immigration as well? What sort of impact would that have on the way people vote this time around? I see a number of hands in terms of our digital audience. I'm going to get to them next. We're going to take a quick break. I'll get you more next. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. The question we're asking you this week is, over 50 countries are heading to the polls in 2024, including South Africa. What do you make of these elections? Why is it so significant for you as a voter? 30 years, remember, 30 years of democracy we're celebrating, we're observing. What difference does that make? In terms of a reflection, how does that form part of your calculus in terms of casting your vote? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Let's go straight to our digital audience now and speak to Mpho. Mpho, what's on your mind?
Hi, how are you?
Better than I deserve. Go ahead.
Okay, so the questions I have to do with youth participation specifically. Within the last year, I've been participating in quite a few dialogues that were talking about youth apathy in politics. And we have come to the conclusion that for most, it's intentional withdrawal. So the first question would be, to what extent do we hold political parties accountable for youth apathy or the intentional withdrawal of the youth in politics? And then the other would be, to what extent do they also contribute to democratic backsliding? Because very recently, Fikile Mbalula said at a press conference that they lied in Parliament intentionally to protect Jacob Zuma, and this was in critique of Umkhonto weSizwe. So with the citizens seeing that, and with a lot of people seeing that the party they trusted has now confirmed that they have been lying to them about how they spend taxpayer monies, the question is, to what extent do we hold them accountable for democratic backsliding? And then after that, what standards have we set for political leaders to put out voter education?
Right. Well, that's an interesting point, Vusi. I was just looking at the turnout earlier on of past elections. 2014 voter turnout was about 73%. The last national elections turnout was 66%, so a drop. What is it? Is it anger? Is it apathy? Is it despondency? How do we get as close as possible to the, what was it, 99 election, where I think it was around 90% turnout?
I think Mpo is raising an important point of accountability and ensuring that we hold our leaders accountable. I think the mistake that we make, not only political leaders, but also civil society, is that whenever we talk about, youth participation, we limit it to the ballot, crossing that X and then coming back after 5 years. And we must understand that as our democracy matures, a part of it requires engaging the political process routinely. For the mere fact that Fikile Mbalula was able to say we defended the former president even though we knew it was wrong, it is because political elites understand that the electorate does not have the capacity to hold the leaders accountable, and the only thing that they have is that vote every 5 years. So I think part of the things that need to be done is civil society, the IEC and political parties themselves teaching that youth participation it goes beyond the ballot. It's mechanisms that enable the voters to hold the elected leaders accountable, and that's where the electoral amendment comes in to say that the pure proportional representation makes it difficult for citizens to hold their leaders accountable, right? So now we must have a mixture of both, because again the first past the post or presidential system is not the answer, and again, going back to what Mpai said, also understanding that the current system that we use was never meant to last beyond the 1999 elections. So we have had so many commissions looking at, viable, electoral systems. So I think it's very important, because when people don't have mechanisms to hold the leaders accountable, they become despondent. And that's why, we've seen, voter turnout declining, because the engagement between citizens and political leaders is only seen once every 5 years.
Dr. Mtimka, do you agree? Maybe in terms of 30 years of democracy, the current political state of play, do you think there's a greater impetus to increase voter turnout this time around? What do you think?
If I didn't have to justify you calling me here, I would say everything that Vusi said. So indeed. So one, on the issue of participation, observe how who attends budget and ward planning processes in municipalities. For the longest time, that's been dominated by the elderly, and I think the reason why that is the case is because residents are a lot more aware of the consequences of laws and policies on them than the young people, who tend to be politicized only once they get to to universities and institutions of higher learning. But what's amazing that's happening as a result of social media is that political engagement has now become fashionable, has got a strong youth element. So I don't think that it's a coincidence that the IEC was successful with other stakeholders in getting a lot more younger people registered. So now that you've got a change in terms of political engagement and platforms of political engagement, we're going to see a narrowing between participating on social media and, in fact, being actively involved in politics. So I think that the traditional platforms for political expression didn't really cater for young people, where you find that they preferred to rather create their own platforms, whether it's fees must follow, whatever the case may be, in order to express, to take place in politics on the basis of the things that are pressing to themselves. And indeed, as you see, if you look at election data, you would see that the older young people are, the more they become interested in politics. So that bracket from 25 onwards becomes a lot more involved than their younger counterparts.
Right. Let's speak to Mpolosa. Do you think, Mpolosa, that there's an over-reliance on sharing sentiment on social media rather than the traditional active citizen, hitting the ground running, so to speak, and making waves on the ground, so to speak?
Thank you and good evening. The first thing I'd like to say is that these 2024 elections are a very pivotal political moment in South Africa. They make us reflect on our past and where we are going as a nation. And I think there is a general sense, an undeniable sense of dissatisfaction and frustration on the ground, whether it's the youth, whoever. Everybody as a nation is frustrated because of the numerous socioeconomic issues that we're facing: the unemployment, the crime, the corruption, and most recently the energy crisis that we have. So that eventually is going to lead to a decline of voter turnout, because it's also indicating the behavioral pattern of how the people, it's a reflection of how the people are feeling and the sentiments of the people.
Yeah.
But to add on, for me, I think it is very significant for us to take this opportunity going into the election to pose very critical questions, like these political parties or leaders that we are voting for, can they effectively respond to the challenges and prioritize the interests of the people? Or is it just people who are hungry for power or populist movements?
Right.
And when one is voting
how do you make up your mind? Do you attend rallies? Do you read? Does anyone read manifestos anymore? I hope so. I hope they do. How does it form part of your calculus in terms of voting for a certain party or an individual?
Thank you for that question. So to be honest, I cannot speak for everybody in terms of whether they read the manifestos, but I think I've realized the trend of people tend to vote for what they're familiar with. And the phrase they'll use is it's better I vote for the devil I know than the devil that I don't know. So there tends to be a trend of influence of who to vote for without actually acquiring knowledge, acquiring information about a certain party. What are its economic policies? How do they envision in terms of dealing with issues of diplomacy, trade, international cooperation? How do they deal with economic growth? People don't really go out there and read a blueprint of what each political party has to bring on the floor. So for me, it's going into there, and I have to ask myself, what are the economic policies of this party, and how do they intend to address the issue of economic growth? It being, as a youth, how are they going to address the issue of funding, of education? How are they going to address the issue of the energy crisis that we're currently dealing with, because it's affecting all of our lives in one way or another?
Right.
And when I vote for them, what are the methods and the mechanisms that I can use to hold them accountable for their actions and decisions? Can I actually hold them accountable? Do they open those platforms? And how do they address issues of corruptions internally, even within themselves?
100%.
So those are some of the things that when I sit down and I look at what I'm about to vote for, I need to be able to answer these questions and say, at the end of the day, once I've marked that box, I know that I voted for this party, and I know that I'm going to hold them accountable using 1, 2, 3, 4, because I did my investigation
from the place of information, 100%. And Nhlanhla, let's hear from you, then Zipozonke, and Kaniso, and Neo. Nhlanhla?
Good evening to you and your viewers. Let me firstly say these elections will determine the future of this country. It will be our opportunity to demonstrate the power we hold as youth and citizens in general, because we have actually come to realization that this is not a vehicle we would wish to use to take us to the future. I'm speaking about the current regime or the current government. Also, as the youth, because I personally hold a brief for the youth because I'm also a youth. I would say, us as the youth, the Fees Must Fall generation has built a new political landscape for us. To say, guys, we are building this for you. You must take it further. And how do we take it further? Is it by fire or through the ballot? So at this rate, we are given a chance to say, okay, guys, go through the ballot.
Right.
The ballot way to say, go and take your frustration out there. However, don't be emotional. Be logical about it. For us as the youth, when casting those votes, we must think about all the issues that are frustrating us.
Thank you, Mtimka. Let's hear from Zipho Zonke.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening to the panelists and to the viewers that are watching this show. Happy New Year to everyone. For me, it's simple. In 2019, we had 14 million people, so-called young people, that were eligible to vote, and they didn't vote. And for me, if just by my own experiences and the people I've spoken to, and just generally looking out there, I think the main reason is that young people feel like there isn't anyone who represents them, or someone who they can look at and say, you know what, I can get behind that leader. I can go for that message that he's putting out there, or she's putting out there. And I think in 2024, I think I was reading an article yesterday in the Sunday World saying someone like Duduzane Zuma is going to open a party at the end of January. And seeing someone like that, I've seen his work through social media. I've seen his work I've seen his work live from where I am. I stay in Tegrini, and he's done a lot of work here in many parts of the country. Right. And as a young person, for me, there's no other person or no other type of leader that's like that, that's leading through actions. Right. I'm hearing everyone talk about manifestos and all of these things, and I'm like, we're at a point now where we've got 30 years of data, and that 30 years of data is saying that old style of politics doesn't work.
So basically seeing yourself or your community in a leader is an important factor. Yes. I got your point, Zipho Zinko.
Can I just quickly make one more quick point?
In 10 seconds, sir. All right.
You guys are talking about MK and ANC and all these people. And for me, that's just a rebranding of old politics. Like, when are we going to say, as young people, guys, there's 14 million of us from 2019 that can take over the country through organizing ourselves and going in a direction that says, you know what, we don't care what these old people are doing. We as young people are charting our own path. Like, let's stop regurgitating old politics. It's getting played out. Like, it's 2024, guys. Come on, let's go.
Point taken, Zipho. Thank you very much. Neo, let's hear from you, sir. Neo.
Oh, yeah. Good evening to everyone in studio, and happy New Year to everyone and to all the viewers. Hey, I'm going to be a bit quick. So, first and foremost, the question of the week. If I'm to answer it in other ways, we look at the relations that we have with other countries, right? We have 50 countries more than 50 countries going into elections. If we consider the relationships we have with other countries, that is going to have an impact on it. You know, the policies we have, international policies that we have with other countries, right? So now it also going also into the elections. It's also going to go also into the standings that we have of the country in different wars and situations. I mean, if you have a coalition government, it means decisions that have been taken in the past that are going to impact what is going to happen, right? So meaning that you might find that more than 50% of the parties that are in government are going to take maybe, let's say, the side of Russia instead of Ukraine. And now, when we look at the elections, they're going to be based on the classes of people that we're going to have. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So now you have your lower class that are looking at service delivery, right? So these people are going to vote for parties according to what they've been getting and what they want, right? And then you have your middle class who are looking at their incomes, you know, the incomes that they've been receiving. Many people haven't been getting the increments. They're going to vote for parties that what they tell them that they're going to give them. And then you have your higher class that are considering international relations, right? Other countries are going into elections, meaning that decisions and policies are going to be impacted. So they're going to vote on countries that are going to, meaning that the presidents that they are going to vote for is going to impact what party they're going to vote for, right? And then
we have to leave it there. We'll unfortunately have to leave it there. But look, these conversations will continue. Let me just give you a bit of a background. It's Topical. It's going to hyper-focus on elections. We're going to bring you guys back onto the program, airing your views. That's the whole point of this program. And Kanisa, I know I didn't get to you, sir, but we will definitely prioritize you. We'll bring you back into the program. Dr. Mtimka, we thank you so much for your time, sir. Appreciate your time. Vusi, pleasure as always. Value added, no doubt. All right, here's my take before we go. It's a new year. It's an election year, so we are examining, we're reassessing, we're analyzing with the purpose of getting to a better place as a family, as a community, right? 2024 has also renewed our sense of purpose. And I say renew because our mission here at It's Topical it's not changed. We're still trying to focus on what will give you value. Sometimes we hit, sometimes we miss, right? And when we miss, you tell us. Oh boy, you tell us. And that's fine, right? It's part of the job, and we will take constructive criticism from you any day. Why? Because we do this show for you. The concept of the show is different. Our digital audience, for example, they are not meant to be guests in the traditional sense of the word in terms of broadcast, right? Yes, they are invited, but think of them as an extension of you who are watching. They are sourced from the general public, those who have shown interest in this topic and pretty much have the same burning questions as you do. We also bring in the guests, like Vusi, like the good doctor, the stakeholders, the newsmakers, to give you the answers. And it might not always be the answers you're looking for, but it's a step in the direction of fleshing out the issues at hand. There's a deep understanding of the overriding purpose of the show. It is and has always been to give you a wide range of perspectives, to help you make decisions that will benefit you and your family. It's a blessing to get another opportunity this year to try and add value to your life. Believe me, we don't say that just for the sake of saying that. We don't take it for granted. For me personally, it's a gift to speak to you every Sunday. So thank you for being present. Here's to a better 2024, and that's my take. If you miss anything, be sure to watch this episode of The Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.